Inevitable to be third world when your name has been extracted from your tongue and its gravitas unearthed from your mind. With fragments in our hands, attempted recreating beauties lost to the sleeping moon, Africa. You are the essence of innovation and origin of civilization. How have you forgotten the root of all life? The first human words were spoken by you. You cradled mathematics, rocked navigation, pressed paper from papyrus reed, burped pyramids. Were visionaries before we were accredited, so we exhaled the future. Exponential innovation and thinking for you was not a program incubated in a hub. It was your communal daily bread, imagination, the language with which we spoke to each other. Fear irrelevance brewed by old knowledge. Fall in love with the future you have not kissed. Set your own table before the world. Deck it with your own systems. Feast on your force to drape descendants with a power. Not all that is foreign is greater than your own. Hone your force. Own your ish.
Welcome, welcome everybody. And that was the poet for the month, Emma Mabie, and we thank her for her beautiful poem, which will be shared throughout the month. I'd just like to welcome all of you who are here with us today. I think some people will continue joining us, but we have a full program and a lot, that we want to share. So I think we'll just jump right into it. My name is Geshi Karuri Sabina. I am not your speaker for today. I'm really just here to cue them up. But basically, I'm part of the Civic Innovation Network and an associated South African Cities Network, who are, among others, co-sponsoring, co-hosting this Urban Month. With the sponsorship that we have from Luminate and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, we're really delighted today to have the first in our series of what we're calling the Smarter Cities series. We hope you'll join sessions throughout the month. They'll be at the same time, same day, not necessarily the same place. There'll be different links. But the series begins with consciousness today, goes on to imagination, participation, and then action. I very briefly wanted to maybe say why we're doing this session and series. For many of us, I don't think you're unaware that the idea of the smart city has often been sort of contentious and framed in ways that can sometimes feel alienating to us, or even perhaps seeming to perpetuate some rather troubling trends in sort of conventional development. So for many of us, I think there have been questions about what does smart cities mean. And so what we thought we would do for this month is take a slightly different tact, ask different questions about what it means for our cities to be smarter, starting from the philosophical, going to the mental, the social, and then finally to asking what this means for policy and action. So we hope you'll engage throughout the month, and we hope it'll be an interesting time. Today we have an unusual speaker in our midst. Typically we'll have our usual urban design speakers or our domain technologists talking about smart cities. Anuraj Gambhir is somebody I met clear across the world about half a year ago. And he's an internationally recognized exponential thought leader, strategic business startup advisor, and a technology visionary. What I can say from the time I've known him is that he's a full-on tech geek with many, many direct involvements in cutting-edge sort of technology development, commercialization, and that sort of thing. But what really attracted me to him is what I'm thinking is that somehow he manages to make connections to deeper questions about our consciousness, our spirituality, the kind of leaders we want to be, the kinds of questions we ask as we think about development. So we thought this would be a good start, that we'll both do a little bit of feeding our tech fetish, but also balancing it with these concerns and societal issues we have around humanity, exclusion, the planet. And I think you'll find that he has his own way of sense-making between these tensions. I hope he'll be talking to us today about his new sci-fi series to come, The White Mirror, which we are all very excited about. I hope we'll get to hear a little bit about that. Among all of that, he also happens to be a smart city enthusiast. But again, I think you'll find he takes a broader view on it at different scales, and we'll be hearing a bit about that. We'll share his links so that you can follow up on him. But what's most important is that we have the man in person here. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Anuraj. We won't read through his whole bio. I think I've told you enough and we'll share the links. So let's maximize our time with him. In terms of the session and how we hope to run it, we've got a bit of time, 90 to 120 minutes. What we will do is, he has plenty of content and we've invited him to spend much of the first hour really sharing that. Although he is quite open to being interrupted, I've told him maybe he doesn't know South Africans very well. We'll take over his presentation if he's not careful. So we'll probably allow him to largely go through his content, but I would like to welcome all of you to actively use the chat, raise questions, make comments. We'll definitely have time in the second hour to come back to that and have more of an engagement with Anuraj. So without further ado, Anuraj, I'd like to welcome you to take the stage. For those of you who are not familiar with Zoom, you can go to his image and click on the 3 dots on top, and you'll be able to pin him as the main speaker if you don't want to look at 30 faces instead of the speaker. So feel free to do that. Anuraj, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Geshi. It's a great pleasure. I'm just sharing my screen here. So hi, everyone. Hello from beautiful Sydney. Well, it's 11 o'clock at night here.
Anuraj, there's a bit of an echo.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll turn the volume down in my other one. I hope that's better now.
Much better, yes.
Okay, great. Excellent. So I'll be covering, let me go through some of my outline of the talk. As you know, Geshi said that I've got a lot of content, really be covering, quite a broad area of the consciousness sort of elements of a future smart city. And I wanted to start with some key megatrends, which I'm sure many of you are probably aware of, so I might be whizzing past some of them, but feel free to stop me at any moment. I'll go through some aspects of fusion of technologies in smart cities and communities. And I think in smart cities, I want to be very inclusive. It's very much talking about, rural elements or smart, living, smart being as a whole. And I think it's all about where humanity resides in general. That's where we are trying to uplift and elevate to a new level. And I'll talk a bit about big data, how that's a very key facet of how we can influence the design of smart cities, and then go into a little bit of interconnectivity across different industries, the fact of transdisciplinarity, and then look at this sort of key topic around where technology and spirituality intersect to really look at a future awakened consciousness for the exponential mindset, and then some key takeaways. So without further ado, let me get started with some key megatrends, and I'm sure you've heard of VUCA. So the world, certainly at this moment in time too, we're very much all experiencing it being volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I'll revert back to this with a new VUCA later on towards the end of my presentation, which is what I think we all want to head towards. So I've actually got 3 exponential buzzwords or terms that I'd coined over 3 decades of my career. And I've actually got a 4th one, which I'm just announcing soon and putting that forward, which we can certainly discuss later on. And it's to do with the latter part of my presentation around consciousness very much. So the first one was when I worked in the mobile industry in the telecommunication space called Simplicity, which was very much as mobile phones in the early days were, obviously a lot of complex technology and electronics put together. And it was all about hiding that technology and enabling the benefits for the user. Because I think Murphy's Law, we've all known the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the people use less than 20% of the features or functionality on a mobile device. So it was during that time when I worked quite a bit on the design of mobile devices, and then later on in smartphones, feature phones, and then smartphones. It was about how do we make complex things simple and really hide that complexity to enable the simplicity and the benefits of it. Second one was around collaboration. So it was my career of, say, 15 odd years of being chief innovation officer for many large corporates and organizations around the world, where it was so much about the openness and collaborative, deep collaboration around bringing innovation, what true innovation is very much about anyway. But we can elaborate a bit more on that as we go along. And then the third one, which has been more recent in the last 6-7 years, has been more around experientiation, where I've done a fair bit of work or involvements with immersive media, more specifically augmented virtual reality, mixed reality, which I'll be talking a little bit later on about. And that's where we see that movement from old school storytelling to immersive story showing, or what I even take it further, saying story living, story being, and in that level. So we're living in this hyper-connected world of the empowered customer. Even Time magazine back in 2007 awarded us, we, the person of the year. So, and we've all very much, I'm sure, aware of the 4 industrial revolutions that we have been witnessing over the few, centuries, the recent centuries, which is Industry 1.0, or, basically starting from mechanization, electrification, automation, and now it's more the unification and really being the intelligent, next level of automation with fusion of various technologies like IoT, AI, big data, blockchain, AR, VR, robotics, synthetic biology, and so forth. The exponential technologies, as we call it. But what we're really seeing is with something which has not been formally been announced is really the Industrial Revolution 5.0, which is actually where humanity comes in a lot more closer to the technology. And we talk about this being the the cooperation between man and machine, as they call it. And it's that harmonization of intelligent, networks, computing, but very much putting humanity at the forefront of how that personalization is really coming about. And I think I'll be touching on various points along this as we explore the smart city of the future. Some of the key interesting megatrends which Gartner talks about and are revealed through the hype cycle, which I'm sure many of you would have again seen. But we really see things like, explainable AI and so many other elements like AR, VR, of course, which have crossed the chasm. And now we're seeing a lot more early, adapters of, technologies like the two-way BMI, the brain-machine interface, which I'll again be talking about a bit later around consciousness. And we see some of those taking on board very rapidly. And of course, AI has so many different manifestations, from machine learning, deep learning, cognitive, adaptive, composite, generative, and embedded AI, explainable AI, like I was saying. So all that is certainly gone through quite an evolution also, and some of them at a very early stage. And of course, quantum computing and other further developments that are out there. And then we also talk about AGI, which of course is at a very early stage, but in 2029 and then 2045 are certainly the years to watch out for when we talk about it, surpassing sort of human intelligence, as they say, as Ray Kurzweil talks about it. Now here's a whole bunch of information about various technologies which are the top few for the coming decade. Obviously AI, IoT, the mobile social internet, blockchain, big data, automation, the usual suspects. But I think it's an interesting, explanation here. I'm just going to pass through that. Something which I really, focus on and tell companies or people to very much consider is that breakdown of which horizons that they're working on, and to really balance it out, because a lot of people get stuck with the operational, horizon 1, the now, which is very important, of course, to focus on. But I think you've got to look ahead and look at new products, services, and that's where kind of the incremental to a more disruptive innovation sort of phase comes in. But then looking at what we call moonshots at Singularity U is really where we talk about Horizon 3, which is more high risk, but very high impact. But we're talking about multiple X product creation value, or value creation really, potential there. And what really is happening is we definitely tend to overestimate the effect of technology in the short run, but underestimate it in the long run. And I think it's a great saying by Roy Amara, who's put that forward, and we continuously sort of notice that across the board. Now, with the pace of change, what we notice here, and I know the picture's a little bit not that clear, but what you're seeing here is actually the horse and cart, dominated in the 1900, whereas the motor car, you just see one of them. But in 13 years, it was displaced so rapidly on Fifth Avenue, New York. So we're really talking about that moving shift from linear to exponential. And I think what could be a better time, or rather moment, where we're certainly, I think even the layman understands what exponential growth is about. Unfortunately, as we've seen with the pandemic, we're all witnessing that growth has been quite exponential. And we've seen technologies obviously are going through that phase. And what I'll be talking about is building that exponential mindset to actually keep up with that and to go ahead of it. So we really noticed that as we moved through the early phase of deception, everything looks very linear fashioned, but it's the knee of that curve. Once we surpass that, that's when it really takes off. And it goes so fast that it's very hard to comprehend. And I think Roy Amara's saying what I mentioned earlier is very valid then. So if I ask you that, or mention that, if you take 31 meter steps, you've traveled how many? 30 meters, right? But if you take 30 exponential steps, can I ask how much you would have traveled? Does anybody want to quickly unmute and say, give a quick answer? Okay, maybe I'll just skip to the next slide then. It's 1 billion meters, and it's 26 times around the Earth. So that's what 30 exponential steps is. So it's a very large number, as you can see. It's quite a bit of growth potential there. What we talk about at Singularity University is the 6 Ds, which is anything that can be digitized, goes through a phase of deception, disruption, can be dematerialized, demonetized, and eventually democratized. And so it's no longer about creating ecosystems, it's about curating them. And my own experience and work has been in various different industries, primarily the telecom industry, the media, the internet, and IT sort of space. And really it's that fusion and convergence. But then as it sort of proliferated across so many domains, it's been quite an explosion of transdisciplinarity, as I call it, areas. And what we're also noticing is that shifting centers of innovation globally, from west to east and from internal to collaborative. And I certainly was part of my career where I spent quite some time in the West, but also setting up innovation labs, centers of excellence for companies like Ericsson and so forth, and as their first, distributed polycentric hub of innovation in India, beyond the Stockholm, which was their headquarters and the prime, center for innovation. So I think we're really seeing that happen across the board. And another key trend, which a lot of my work in emerging markets, and certainly in Africa, I'm sure you have a similar term to this. In India, we call it Jugaad Innovation, which is really thinking frugal, and it's what it is about is really creating maximum value with minimal resources. And Jugaad actually term comes from a old rural Indian transport vehicle, kind of a multi-purpose utility vehicle. And I'm sure in Africa, there are a lot of parallels to that. I've certainly done a bit of work in West Africa, in Nigeria, spent some time there. And I think there were some great cross learnings in this philosophy of Jugaad and frugal innovation, or something called reverse innovation, which the West and Professor Vijay Govindrajan, who has done a fair bit of work in that. In fact, it inspired a lot of great innovation. And one of them is actually the Tata Nano, which was a $2,500 car, which was launched several years ago in India. And it was actually a key insight, which was observed by, Mr. Tata himself, Ratan Tata, the ex-chairman, and of, the safety the lack of safety he saw of people being on a moped or on a motorcycle, or, a whole family traveling on that. So if he wanted to reinvent the car from scratch, and it was really looking at, how do we look at the design to cost, look at not compromising safety, but really bringing about that whole revolution of, frugal to innovation, which was then democratized to that level. The next area I wanted to quickly mention was about the education space, because I've been doing a fair bit of work in that area too, teaching and mentoring and involved with various different courses and defining courses with business schools and entities like that. So transforming old school, we've really seen that shift happen from, it's no longer about a sage on the stage, but being a guide on the side. And we've seen tens of thousands of MOOCs. And of course, many of them have become so popular now because of the online revolution and everything going digital and being connected. And I think what we're seeing with those massively online open courses, which universities, now even organizations and many other entities have been launching, has created that approach to entire connectivity of next level education and lifelong learning is what we call it. And the flipped classroom is something I adopted many years ago. It's really about where students coming into the class, spend more time collaborating on solving problems and doing real case studies rather than just studying theory. So it's something which I was quite involved with at this business school, which was a global business school, where we had a global MBA program with students from Mumbai. Well, actually, spending time in the campus in Mumbai, Dubai, Singapore, and Sydney, and then actually immersing in those markets and getting real life experience with a very interesting course. But also we had great online learning, engaged classroom with, as you can see here, set up many years ago, in fact, which has become so popular now. Other key trend in education we notice is the move from STEM to STEAM to STEAM. So it's entrepreneurship, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, which I think the students of the future really need to embrace. So one key project I was involved with the Indian government, and it's something which I certainly also took to Africa later, was the design of a very low-cost tablet. In fact, it was the world's lowest cost tablet at that time at $35. And this is about 12 years ago when we worked on this project with the Indian government and with Indian Institute of Technology, that we came up with a whole team and learning from computer, one laptop per child, and coming up with a design to cost approach. But it was very much around the totality of that experience that we built around it. Because even with an order of 100 million odd units, the first iteration didn't make it to that level, but it was more when we considered the total experience, which is that function of hardware, software, content, and services, that we could really take it to the next level. So aimed at students in the K-12 sort of curriculum, and looking at how do we connect and bring digital India at that time to the next level. We I brought on board one of the key startups which had a great app for children, and it was taking pen pals to a digital format, and it was making children into global citizens. So it's a great app called Touchable Earth from New Zealand, and I'll just play a quick video on that one to make you hear.
Touchable Earth is the first digital world book for kids, where kids are the teachers. That means when Neo and Rathibile in Lesotho, Africa, want to learn about girls' clothes in Nepal, they can learn from a child their own age who actually lives there.
Namaste, my name is Divya. I am 11 years old. All the women wear this type of dress in Nepal, and I am going to explain this dress. This is Joli, this is Dhoti, this is Patuki, this is Mala, this is Sirbandi, these are Duluris, this is Tika. Thank you. Bye.
Key facts about each place are covered, but more importantly, so are aspects of a kid's life, such as their family, their school day, the games that they play, and their culture. The similarities foster curiosity, as does the opportunity to share and learn with somebody their own age.
We see them and they see us.
Yes, and all over the world.
Our goal is to have every place in the world included in Touchable Earth. We have partnered with the largest schools network in the world, iEarn.org, to help create the content. We aim to be the leading donor of tablets for education. We have successfully donated tablets and wireless internet to schools in South Africa, Romania, Iraqi Kurdistan, India, Nepal, and Yemen. Supporting Touchable Earth helps us create new chapters, foster peer learning, and increase access to education around the world.
Thank you, Touchable Earth. Goodbye.
Yeah, so as you saw there, it was really about how do we make kids into that global citizen sort of format with what's meaningful in their lives, with their schools, their family, their friends, and their being in their local habitat. So similarly, we're seeing that democratization happen in healthcare, and another domain which has been close to my heart, actually, looking at really more wellness and healthcare in that regard. And I think it's a great book that Eric Topol had written, The Patient Will See You Now, and subsequent other articles in that, which was really about self-health. And what we're really noticing, that shift from diagnostic to preventative, from sick care to what we really call the true healthcare, onto self-care. And I think this is where we're really seeing that it's the self-help health areas which has become, and health is really the true wealth, as we know. It's all about how do we look after ourselves a lot more than even the system has to. And I think all these are key facets of a human-centric smart city. And a smart city is something which is really like a living organism, the way I call it. It's really all those interlinkage domains of transportation, healthcare, education, energy, all of them sort of coming together to formulate the government, obviously being a key embodying force. And then it's all about the private-public partnerships that need to come about in the right optimal manner to bring that intelligence. But it's a lot more than that, because it's, I think, the consciousness of the smart city which sort of comes up. So in terms of technology, we talk about, Internet of Things, or as Cisco says, Internet of Everything, or Internet of, medical things is another term which has come about. We talk about, Internet of, there's so many other sort of related terms in that space. But I think it's when we look at that in terms of safety, security, agriculture, building management, so many other facets that move from smart living, smart architecture, infrastructure, and then moving into facets like telemedicine and healthcare, and then more into machine to machine or wireless sensors, because I think it's really those sensors, and we're talking about 1 trillion sensors just in a matter of half a more decade coming about. It's really about a lot more data, more control, and that's going to enable a lot more facets of what we call the explosion into that tactile internet, which is a lot more closer to touching on human benefits, directly, right from wearables, which I'll be talking a bit more about, right through to, looking at automated logistics and traffic management and Industry 4.0 sort of coming together to enable a lot of new virtual related services and augmenting us in terms of intelligence. So here's another little diagram I had about a future sort of a smart city, more from a technology perspective, where you've got telecommunications and you've got various technologies like 5G, IoT, you've got industrial sort of elements with IIoT was the term I was looking for earlier, industrial Internet of Things, which GE has been dubbing. We talk about transportation with autonomous capability, electrification, that is a key megatrend. And of course, in healthcare, we talk about that prescriptive and Internet of Medical Things and telemedicine, and cloud, which is where big data analytics, edge, and fog analytics sort of enables a whole new sort of facet. And then we've got a key facet of what we call the city brain, or AI, and cybersecurity has to play a very key role in that. So with the fusion of technologies, I think there's an interesting way to put it forward is data is the new oil, AI is the new electricity, IoT is the new nervous system. And I think that's kind of what we're noticing there with cloud and 5G, IoT, all of this sort of coming together to formulate new use cases and benefits within a smart city. And then we've got elements like the natural user interface with the IFT protocol, if this then that. Then you can enable a lot more contextual services, which are automating things in your home or as you're driving, transiting from one mode to another. And I'll give you an example of that also in a few minutes of a startup that I've been mentoring. And I think with data, as we know, there's such an explosion happening out there. Just in 1 minute or 60 seconds, right? We see 1.3 million people have logged into Facebook, 19 million text messages, 1,400 downloads and then just so much happening in terms of the 764,000 hours of Netflix watched in just 60 seconds. So it's quite humongous in terms of the creation of data. And we're talking about 2.8 plus exabytes of data being generated every single day. But that data means nothing unless we do something with it. And I think it's all about how do we create the right insights and how do we take the subsequent big actions from it. So it's really moving from that phase of descriptive to diagnostic to predictive to prescriptive analytics. So there's, we're really drowning in information, but we start for knowledge, as John Naisbitt says very nicely. And that's where it's about how do we convert that data into meaningful information and then subsequently into real true wisdom that can be of great value for us. So in transportation, that's what we're seeing. There's so much data being generated in that space. We're talking about the connected car with vehicle to anything communications within the vehicle and outside the vehicle. And, there's a startup called GoFar that I've been mentoring. And what they've really done is every car built out of after June of 2006 has an OBD2 port, what we call an onboard diagnostics port, which is almost like a USB port in a car. And you can plug in this dongle and make that car pretty much into a smart car. So it actually measures the various things from the, and gets the data from the car ECU, from the computer. And you're getting various driver information, driver behavior information, how the vehicle is performing, its drag coefficient and so forth. But you can actually control also various facets and then actually gamify that so that you can actually see how well somebody is driving and improve their driving even over time. And it's all based on obviously data and analytics there. But what we're seeing is with the future of automobility, there are so many new use cases which are coming about with autonomous transport and what a vehicle can be used for. And this was actually the Mercedes F15, which I happened to be at the launch of in Shanghai at CES many years ago. And again, 2 years ago at CES, Toyota showcased this e-pallet multi-purpose moving space, which could be morphed or adapted for so many different situations, for ride sharing, for logistics, for transportation, for delivery, and so forth. But again, all this automation of happening in the vehicle is creating a lot of data, and there are so many touch points there, which Intel talks about, basically 4,000 gigabytes per day, per autonomous vehicle that is being generated. A lot of it obviously coming from the LiDAR and from the capabilities to measure and to keep it safe, and the different sensors that it has on board. And what we're seeing with data, again, another startup in the energy space that I was mentoring is been looking at AI, where it's really touching on a lot more human elements of technology. So what cost is about intelligent living. It's really what they do is they've got a smart sensor, basically this box you see here, which sits right next to your normal meter, and it makes your utility meter into a smart sort of measurement tool. And they get a spectral fingerprint of every appliance, energy fingerprint pretty much of every appliance which is in the house. And with that, we're able to sort of see, what is the optimal time to use that appliance, for example, for best energy savings, but also go into deeper learning capabilities and provide personalized smart home understandings. But what's interesting is actually when you cross across this capability in other industries areas, such as in looking at in the healthcare space. So if grandma, for example, did not turn on the kettle at 8 o'clock in the morning as one use case, it could send an alert. And then you could interlink that with other sensors in the house to look at aged care, for example, living, and if there's a fall detection sort of capability, and then of course smart video analytics based, which is based on cameras and imaging sensors. There's a lot of potential to integrate this with and make it a lot more capable. So as I was saying earlier, it's really that moving from hindsight to foresight is what the capability that data can move into, as Gartner talks about, from descriptive to prescriptive analytics. And another interesting facet of smart cities is looking at, or some great experimentation that Google, which has this, taken over this company called Sidewalk Labs, had a great setup in Toronto. And what they've done is actually looking at a lot more human-driven elements of affordability, sustainability, and driving economic opportunities and so forth for setting up this experimental micro city, or a precinct rather. And that has been a great learnings, I think, coming up from that, which are being proliferated across smart cities. Because again, smart cities is the term is being very loosely used. It can mean a lot more infrastructure driven in certain markets, whereas in the Western markets, we're talking a lot more next level sort of facets. And that's where I'm sort of coming from, is that human centric sort of focus, where all those technologies and enablements are bringing that phase around. So some of the projects I've been involved with, in fact, I was looking at also some work in Hong Kong a couple of years ago, where we've been working on this innovation precinct, the largest of its type, called the Greater Bay Area, which is in Guangdong, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and Hong Kong, that sort of whole space there. And more recently, I've been involved with the conceptualization of a future floating smart city, which is in Tasmania. And that's also based along the lines of oceanics, which is the UN Habitat sort of driven one. And we talk about in Tasmania, which is, we have a lot of great wilderness there, which is a great island state we have in Australia in the south. And I kind of call it entrepreneurship meets wilderness, or quantum meets mindset, and humanity meets technology. So it's very much about the community-driven approach of this floating smart city that we have been conceptualizing with key domains around it, specifically education and healthcare. Another interesting facet, obviously, we see things like in Singapore, which is a lot more, and I think that's where the learnings come out from, is about being a garden, well, a city in a garden rather than a garden in a city. And I think it's up to us to choose on how we can make that. But it's about how do we bring biophilic design and that whole facet of, outside in that regard. So, sorry, just trying to change the screen there. So what you see actually behind me is this, in fact, the image also on my slide is a Atlassian's headquarters, new headquarters, which are being built in Sydney. And what this image is of the of this hybrid timber design, the first of its kind, 40-story building, which will be part of a tech precinct and actually a tech hub by the Australian government here in Sydney. And this building is going to be ready in just under 5 years now. And it's going to be a very unique sort of biophilic driven design, smart building of its type. Some other key learnings that we notice are from the blue zones of the world. And I think if you know, there are 5 of these around the world, and it's all about how people live, breathe, and act. And it's about how it's people living over 100, that has the largest centenarians in the world, people living over 100 years old. And those longevity hotspots are very much interlinked with the environment. And I think it has some great learnings. In fact, when we were there, and Geshe was there with me, we were up in beautiful Costa Rica, where they talk about the pure life, which is pura vida. And this is where, great learnings of biophilic and nature and, that Gaia philosophy. And I think that's what I talk about very much as a key organic element of a smart city, where nature and, flora and fauna, the entire habitat sort of comes in and becomes very much that breathing essence of a smart city, because nature has to play a very key role in moving that forward. And some of my own key inspirations in this space have been, sacred sites, which Martin Gray, had some great, who actually left or renounced the world and traveled to, I think, over 60 countries, and has documented many different facets of, of places beyond the historical significance. So he's looked at energy and the spiritual sort of upliftment that a place gives. And I was very fortunate to be in Giza at the Cheops at the King's Chamber, and we meditated up there and had a great experience in over there about over 10 years ago now. And I think I've been following sacred sites quite a bit, and I think there's some great inspiration and triggers for smart cities from places of peace and power in that regard. So I wanted to move on to, well, another great learning that we've been noticing is from the Burning Man project. And I think you might have heard of this great festival, or it's much more than a festival that happens. In fact, we were having it over the last couple of weeks. It happened online this time, of course, but normally we've got over, I think, 70,000 people came over for this event. Last year, I think there were about 50,000. The year before, they had a record 70,000+ people coming up in Black Rock City. So a city comes up pretty much overnight for 9 days in Nevada, in the desert, and it just becomes an amazing sort of festival of humanity, and great learnings from there, which come about, I think, in terms of how we share, how we sort of build our future, and how we can interact and come up with great ideas that we can take forward. And in fact, one of my good friends, Brian, who might be actually on this call even, who's contributed quite a bit to Burning Man, called through this virtual reality-based creation called Unity Sanctuary. And he's got a great spiritual sort of experience there of a wellness temple that he talks about in this space. And another great area that I've been involved with actually is been fortunate to start something here in Sydney a couple of years ago called the Exponential Thought Leaders Bushwalk the Talk, where we get together in nature to discuss various big issues, and including the UN SDGs. So all that sort of has led me to interesting facet or a concept that I've been sort of nurturing over time called White Mirror. And it was actually inspired by Black Mirror, which is a series on Netflix that you might have seen. And sort of Black Mirror is very powerful from looking at technologies that can be deployed in the future, but it's unfortunately very dystopian. So I sort of flip that model and talk about moving from dystopia to utopia, and how can we bring a lot more abundance over scarcity, remove that fear and displace it with love, and really bring about that light from darkness and so forth. But many different facets of it are coming about, and I think it was an article that I triggered off earlier this year, which sort of led to a great team coming together, where we've been, and I'll talk more about that a bit later, maybe in the interactive part, as you may have more questions about it. But it's really very much aligned to the UN SDGs that we talk about, the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 of them, and very much aligning ourselves to number 3, 4, well, pretty much all of them. But what we're looking at is some key elements in 17, which is partnerships and goals, really being a key part of how do we unify all of these and use great exponential technology and the philosophy of positive psychology and things that with Singularity U that we sort of proliferate to come together with this experience of a mindset or philosophy of White Mirror. And again, a good representation of the UN SDGs here in a circular economy sort of format, from biosphere, society, and economy. And I think some great learnings that we're seeing through this pandemic, as we're going through that major reset or reboot, as one may call it, and talk about it as that how can organizations of the future with the right partnerships come about as not just almost imagine if every organization is a B Corp at the end of the pandemic, coming out of the other end, where we talk much more about people, purpose, before profit. And I think what we're also seeing is some great learnings, which during the COVID-19, in the early part, this was a great post that came about in WhatsApp, moving from the fear zone to learning zone to growth zone. And then somebody had further added an action zone to it. So I think if you can, and you'll certainly get access to these slides, by the way, so you'll be able to see them further. But I think how people are using this time to really utilize in the most positive manner to come beyond, and because mental well-being is a very critical topic, by the way, and it's something which I'll touch on in a few moments. But we've at White Mirror sort of team have sort of come up with this next level of a White Mirror sort of representation of that, and we talk about the Wetopia as our key mantra within White Mirror, because it's very much moving from dystopia to utopia to a Wetopia, where it's about everybody, and moving from an example like people complaining at the early days of the obviously pandemic, identifying those emotions, how do we grow with the right gratitude, and then how do we look at people and planet with the right action zone. So you can have a look through that. Right, so might take a little pause here while I go to the next phase, if there's any comments or quick questions or something anybody has.
So I don't see any raised hands right now, but maybe there are a couple of interesting things in the chat. I think one that many people might be thinking about that Mohammed raises is we've seen all these wonderful uses of tech, but based on precedent, big tech or government would use this for insidious reasons. How do we prevent this? Why should we allow tech greater access to our lives than they already have? And there were a few other comments along that line. I'm sure you've heard this one before, Anuraj, but what's your view on this, sort of the concern we all have about the mischief that follows with all of these trillion sensors you're telling us about?
Yeah, obviously, data is, and I think people, privacy has been redefined, obviously, in these times, I think, as, so many organizations and governments have launched COVID apps. And I think it's terms of safety and looking at security, how much of surveillance can we allow, and how much of, interception of private data, for example. But I think what I would allude to more is the social media sort of space. And the social dilemma is a great, by the way, something which was launched recently on Netflix. I'd highly recommend that as a great wake-up call for what is happening out there from the likes of Facebooks and the other social media giants who've been collecting data for so long. And I think there's so much more of data out there for people who've been actively involved in that space, that it's really, the governments, I think, are trying to find the right balance, obviously. And I think it's not easy. It varies so much from culture to culture, and there are parts of humanity, obviously, which are so paranoid by giving away even an ounce of data. But I think if it's wet in the right way, if it's put together and openly sort of provided that what the actual use is for, and that if you can control it, and I think an opt-in philosophies are a lot more interesting there. But we can talk more of that a bit later too. Yeah, so good point about data privacy. Yeah.
Great. Do you want to take a few more, or do you want to carry on? We can come back to the questions later.
Well, if it's relating to anything I said before, yeah, I can take a couple more. Or not?
There's one that's interesting, and I think you do have a view on. So Anand is saying that we seem to be projecting the future as primarily urban. Is anyone questioning this basic assumption or trend? Do you think the future is urban?
Well, I think, yeah, we've seen that urbanization happen across so much in I think that great mega trend in emerging markets, but also we're seeing the reverse trend happen, which is interesting. And I was on a call the other day with folks in Shanghai who were talking about how, and I think we're seeing that here very much too, that people are moving away from the cities. And I think the growth of satellite towns, which we've seen in Asian places like in Malaysia, you got Petaling Jaya from Kuala Lumpur, even in India, from New Delhi, for example, we've got two big satellite towns of Gurgaon and Noida. And I think that happens everywhere, even in Australia and Sydney, where I am. We've got Wollongong, we've got Newcastle in the north. So that sort of sprawl beyond the key metropolis, there are more micro metropolises sort of coming about and micro cities, and they're all being connected through this sort of hub and spoke model a lot more. But I think we're seeing another shift happen across to rural, whereas we see in countries like India and of course in Africa, the rural urban migration has been a very large dominant sort of force. But I think that's slowing down to an extent in many places. In fact, it's reversing the way I said in people like Shanghai, where the young people, and these were some interesting bunch of young people who did some great work with some SDGs we were talking about from our Singularity U leadership team, that were actually moving out of the city to find places in rural China to settle over there. So that's an interesting shift, because obviously people don't want that pollution, and now that I think we can work from anywhere, and certainly the virtual connectivity that we're all experiencing is enabling that.
You were also speaking recently on a panel with James Ehrlich about regenerative, he calls them regenerative cities. So this idea of these less urban direction, I suppose, in terms of how he sees technology being deployed. That speaks a little bit to a question that actually Krishna, or a comment that Krishna Duplessis is making about why do we assume the Industrial Revolution continues down a pathway of increasing integration of man and machine? Could we not have an Industrial Revolution that works instead towards integrating humans and nature?
Yeah, no, I think certainly it's very much the cues that we are getting from the blue zone effect, as I was saying earlier. And I think the regenerative work that James has been working on, and certainly this floating smart cities architecture, we're talking about, I think all of that harmonizing and nature playing a very key role in bringing about that transformation for the urbanization. And I think the concrete jungles that we've all been so used to, or I remember when I've been traveling to Dubai, for example, so many times, and the amount of infrastructure that has been built in the Middle East, and specifically in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and those sort of places, has been phenomenal. But I think that's where they've realized now that they need to, and they've now got, of course, underwater townships and architectures and buildings and so forth coming up. So, and they're expanding out into the sea. They've got the palms and the many other sort of village type look of green spaces and reclaimed land and so forth, which is where even Lagos, where I stayed for some time in Nigeria, in Africa, I think noticing how they're actually reclaiming a lot of the land and trying to, and Banana Island, which is actually part of Lagos, is also a very green part where they're trying to make it into an oasis and proliferate that across more of the metropolis, I think. Yeah, so I might just continue on for now. And then, so I wanted to talk about sort of wearables, and it's sort of this movement that I talk about as where to able, which is where it becomes a lot more meaningful, because wearables have really taken on the world at so many different levels. In fact, I was involved with doing a fashion show. That's when I met Geshe up in Costa Rica. And it's kind of meaningful wearables where we talk about things like these smart yoga tights, which is smart textiles that will enable you to, perform your yoga much better. It'll quantify it and measure the right posture for you and guide you to improve it, for example. So these natty yoga tights are a great disruptive wearable. Another great, probably I would say, ultimate wearable at the moment is somebody who we'd hosted here in Sydney called Tesla Suit. It's not to do with Tesla. It's a separate startup, actually a scale up very much, and who've done extremely well with some great contracts and things with the space agencies like NASA. And Tesla Suit is actually a full body haptic suit with climate control, biometrics, motion capture, and so forth. And what they have is basically ways to simulate so many different environments in virtual reality integrated in it. And now also recently launched a Tesla Suit glove, which I was at the launch at CES in 2020 in Las Vegas early this year. So we've really pretty much got the full body covered there. And imagine being able to provide that services for firefighter training, or for simulating harsh environments, or for health and wellness, which is another big area that Tesla Suit is working on. And we've got a medical version of this coming about. I'll play a quick video of Tesla Suit. So this one doesn't really have audio. I'll just speak to it. So yeah, as you can see here, the Tesla Suit is enabling a whole range of haptic experiences there. You can simulate heat, like I was saying, or cold, and measure different biometrics. So you've got sensors all over the suit there. You've got kind of pretty much TENS based capability there. So you can feel kind of almost through a low current or electromechanical sort of means to look at getting feedback. And it's being used in multiple different environments. I think, yeah, you can see here from gaming is pretty much where it started, but looking at firefighters, for sports, and of course in medicine, like I said, and helping you train in different environments and simulate a whole range of different capabilities there. And this is the Tesla Suit glove that I was talking about earlier, which is enhancing us. And imagine you'll be able to, during times of COVID right now, if I can shake hands with Peter Diamond is sitting on the other side of the world, this can enable you to do that. Another very interesting thing around a kind of a conscious future vehicle that I was involved with at the launch of at CES this year was with Mercedes-Benz, called Vision Avatar, and it was very much with James Cameron, who was there at the launch along with the chairman of Daimler-Benz, launching this futuristic vehicle, which is very much inspired by biophilic design, by vegan materials, by, as you can see, very much of avatar elements. And I was fortunate to sort of look at the UI and the experience within the vehicle, and it's a full autonomous vehicle with everything sort of very harmonized with learnings from nature. This was the launch video, which I actually shot for an amateur video that I shot with my own camera phone. So I'll just play that. Right. So the future is very much here already. It's just not evenly distributed, as says William Gibson. And I think it's great inspiration from these smart, concept cars that we've seen, which have proliferated, great technology showcases, something I adopted at Siemens when I was heading innovation there, to really look at how do we present great new technologies embedded in mobile phones that, that can be showcased, coming very much from the future. In terms of democratization, what we've seen is, technology like an electron microscope, which is being democratized, something which costs tens of thousands of dollars for $1,200. And I've got that device, this device right here. It's actually a molecular spectroscope, which on your palm can measure, body fat, look at, how fresh a food is, for example. So I'm holding it right here. In fact, I happen to have an apple also with me. Maybe it's not so visible on my screen. Maybe now it is, yeah. So I can actually scan the apple and it will give me how fresh that is in terms of carbohydrate, fat content, and so forth. I'm actually connected through my phone, so I can even do a live demo as we're talking about. So I'll show you that. You can probably see, it's hard to see on that screen there. Maybe if I just change to, oh no. I think it's a little bit hard to see on with this virtual display on.
We'll have to trust you.
Yeah, that's right. But you can see on the screen there, that you can get a spectral fingerprint pretty much of your piece of fruit or food, which could be cheese, for example, in this case, looking at calories, protein levels, carbs, and so forth. And you can even recognize pills with that. So, this is an amazing sort of progress in technology where we've seen things move so fast and democratized so quickly. And similarly, we're seeing that with the wrist-worn wearables, right? I'm sure many of you have been wearing Fitbits and Apple Watches and other, wrist-worn wearables, but I think it's much how they've evolved. And I've got something here called the Life Band, which measures whole heart health, and that sort of gives me something which the medical center, which also I'm holding right here, and you can see in the picture there, it does body fat, body temperature, oxygen saturation, heart rate variability, and so many other different, and blood pressure, all on your palm of your hand. And this one does it on the wrist. So I can do blood pressure. I can even look at my heart age, my mood, through the heart rate variability that it measures. So a lot of the technology with medical grade and clinical grade sort of capability is already out there, which we can utilize. And now what we're noticing is in the media space, we've evolved so rapidly from what was called the media 1.0, which is a lean back, sit back, relax, couch potato mode, or watching TV, for example, to a media 2.0, which is a more engaged, like a computer interactive mode, to a media 3.0, which is jump in immersive media into, really looking at how do we, with augmented and virtual reality, something which first came about from Project Natal or from the Kinect, from Nintendo Wii, for example. All that has evolved, and there's an interesting startup that I was involved with called The Ring, which was about the natural user interface. And again, I've got a quick video of that, which I'll play.
Ring is a wearable input device which will allow you to control almost anything. You just need to wear the ring and tap on the side to start your gesture. Ring captures and analyzes your gesture inside of it and sends the data to your smart devices. Vibration and LED notifies you of status updates.
I'll just pause there. Yep. So yeah, as you see, turn down the volume here. It's really the natural user interface. Looking at normal gestures that can enable you to turn on volume, turn off lights, and do so many different interactions in a lot more harmonious manner, where it's an evolution from the GUI to the NUI, as I call it. And then what we're really seeing is this space of mixed reality, which is that moving from, augmented and virtual reality and sort of transposing and juxtaposing both of those spaces into what we call the virtuality continuum. And I think there's so many different areas there that we're seeing being influenced by augmented and virtual reality, because it's really involved me and I learn, and the interactive elements and the deep empathy that it sort of creates. One of the startups I was mentoring a few years ago, we were looking at actually making a documentary, a film rather, on the deep empathy deficit on this planet. In fact, we had Obama, we had His Holiness the Dalai Lama also on board, but unfortunately we couldn't raise enough funds. But that transformed and morphed into a virtual reality project later on by the startup. And looking at empathy from that great technology sort of media became quite interesting. Another startup that I've been mentoring called Relax VR, where we've used virtual reality for meditation, mindfulness, and putting people through a great multimedia with great music, a voiceover meditation, and lovely, nice backgrounds. So, there are now many different tools out there like Trip and obviously Headspace and Calm and others which are in this space. But we're seeing a massive rise in integration of these to the next level with a lot more new sensors coming about. Another great tool we're seeing in this mixed reality space, is really Microsoft HoloLens. There've been others like, of course, Magic Leap and others, but I will not have enough time to go through all of them. But we've seen early versions of this through Meta Space Classes. It was another very pioneering one, which in fact had some Aussie startup founders in there. So Microsoft HoloLens has been a great tool for, applying and simulating different facets, or even for digital twin based things for smart cities. So being able to provide a full interface. I've got a quick, again, a bit of a video is playing in the background there. So I think it's very evident, obviously, the how powerful a medium like this can be in terms of, bringing about a tool for training and, simulating real life environments in a more safe manner and making it very interactive, obviously. Some medical examples, and of course, in smart cities, there have been so many different applications there with buildings and right through to in the transportation space. I must say, Microsoft has done a great, application with Qantas, one of our key carriers here in Australia, in that space for pilot training and for maintenance and so forth. So when we were talking about big data earlier, and I talked about experientiation, and I think this is where another great area that we're seeing is with mixed reality, and more specifically in virtual reality, we're able to look at big data in a very deeply visual manner, and look at in this medium of spatial sort of understanding of what that data really means, and insights sort of come right to you. And one of those things we saw was with this early tinkering that I was involved with, a company called Impact Multimedia, where we tried with the very first Oculus quite a few years back now, where we experimented pretty much on interest rates of banks, but then we could clearly see the elements of what's coming about from those banks, the right reasons of insights for those interest rates taking those dips or and troughs and peaks. the reasons of that became very evident. I'll just play that video quickly. Sorry, yeah, we've got this startup in, a singularity use startup from Silicon Valley called Flow, which is doing some amazing work. In fact, they've actually done COVID-19, visualizations and look at key trends with heat maps and 3D graphics and so forth. And being able to view that in a virtual reality mode has enabled a very powerful sort of element there. Taking that to the next level, we're seeing things like holography and holograms are where, we're pretty much doing a 360 with storytelling. And, where we're really seeing that higher psychological spatial connection, come about. We've evolved very much from the old campfires, theaters, television, cinema, mobile phones, YouTube pretty much, and then moving on to mobile holograms, which is coming back to that real deeply immersive sort of connection that this form of storytelling is evolving to us. And things like ARHD media, and we even had Professor Stephen Hawking here in the Opera House about 5 years ago now, and I was very much there watching him in a hologram. So it's going to be very much about less things and more people, and that's where we talk about this real human-centric elements coming about with holography. And I think as we see Zoom evolve more into, we've been playing with a lot of different tools like Engage VR, Spatial, and Allspace VR, and many other tools in virtual reality where we can take them to the next level of interaction and do events in that sort of mode. And we're seeing that happen very much with this, space evolved to holography. So the next part I wanted to mention was on mind sensors, on the brain-computer interface, which is EEG and electroencephalography. And there have been some great, work happening in that by companies like NeuroSky, MindPlay, and applications across the board, where EEG has really been democratized with a single-channel EEG sensor, and applications in, what we're really seeing is, I'm showing you here is actually a quick snapshot of a visualization of your brain waves, your alpha, beta, delta, gamma brain waves, and looking at it mashed up being your attention or focus or your meditation or relaxation. And if we can get both of them together, we actually can get into the zone much faster, or in the flow state. And that's something we've been experimenting quite a bit with and looking at different tools. And here's an example of a mind controlled toy, which was launched by NeuroSky a while ago. But we've got examples in controlling other objects, in wellness, in education. There are endless number of applications. Now, one application is very much in measuring sleep. So I'm sure you've heard of sleep being measured through wearables in different formats, but the brain wave sensor is probably the most accurate means there to measure your, and this one called Sleep Shepherd, which actually gives you a sleep score and wakes you up to your natural body clock with, is a great wearable there, which you can have as a textile based, you wear at night. And it's got, speakers in the fabric, which can enable you to, wake up to the nice, music and so forth. And pretty much binaural beats that wake you up to the natural body clock rather than the chronological clock. Another great one is called Life. So this is a multi-channel EEG sensor, which will, is great for measuring driver fatigue. So a lot of enterprises and say truckies are employed in the transportation space. You can take your truck off the road or your person remotely and see if they're really fatigued and stressed and tired. Then it's better than not be driving. So then there are other great tools looking at facial expression and emotional recognition and so forth, like Emotive, which has some great tools there. The Muse is a great mindfulness, EEG thing, and they've got the Muse S band, which I'm holding right here, and this is a 5-channel EEG sensor, which is in fabric, and a great tool there with many different applications around versions of mindfulness and relaxation that will enable you to take you through a whole new level of mental well-being. So it's really about tapping that innovation state. And that's something I was quite involved with, looking at how do we use brain waves and the brain-computer interface to deploy in an innovation lab that we'd set up called iZone. And we looked at really key elements of alpha, where we can look at creativity a lot more in the relaxed state. And this was iZone that we had as a tinkering early imagination lab that was set up in India. And it was interesting to sort of look at how can you influence the right creativity with measuring those brain waves and taking people through the right journey and making them more effective in that sort of brainstorming, for example. Another great example of application of this is in education and learning, which is Effective Learner, which is by NeuroSky, is a great tool for looking at brainwave sensors, for looking at attention spans of students, and then using Pomodoro method, for example, of making sure that they've retained what they've learned nicely, and taking that further. So it's something which has been very proven in certain tests that have been performed in Finland, for example, in schools, where they give the right amount of rest and then come back into a time-boxed based learning paradigm. So the next space is really where we've got the two-way brain-computer interface, what the BMI, or the brain-machine interface. If you mentioned that earlier with the graph from Gartner hype cycle earlier, and there's something called transcranial brain stimulation, where there've been so many great startup that I was mentoring in the space called Numbre, where we've been working with the cerebral palsy sort of space and looking at disability tech, and really looking at how can you influence and bring back the motor skills of people who are differently abled, for example, and great applications of that in really building that mind of the future. And what we're really seeing is this influence with developments like Neuralink from which Elon Musk has more recently provided with 3 pigs as an experiment that they showcased about a month ago now, in their evolution of how we're talking about using less evasive sort of means to have a very precise brain-computer interface, a bi-directional one, to actually reduce and improve creativity and look at so many other areas. So we see that technology is moving so fast that it's pretty much indistinguishable from magic in many regards. And one of the examples of that TDCS, or transcranial direct current stimulation, is this thing called Halo 2 by Hello Neuroscience. I'm holding it right here actually. So that sits on my head, and we've got kind of low current electrodes on the top, which will enable low current through your brain for you to be able to perform certain sports faster, to stimulate your motor cortex, for example, and even improve creativity to an extent. So I can tell you that there's some tools already out there which are early stage, but they're very interesting to see the impact of. Another great wearable that I've been involved with is actually called heart math. And imagine basically if you were able to if you could activate our heart intelligence by hacking our consciousness. And that's pretty much what heart math in a balance allows you to do. So what it's really measuring is, and helping you with, is your subconscious mind and your power of improving your power of intuition. And we are all connected with the Earth's energetic fields. The resonant frequency of the Earth's magnetic field is the same as the human heart rhythm when we are in a coherent state. So helping you with your brain-heart coherence is what heart math is allowing you to do here, and reducing stress, finding balance. And this device again is a great. I'm in fact holding it right here. It's a very small device that clips to my ear, and it's something which is really just play a quick little.
Can you
video.
hear me? Can you feel me? This is a story about your life and about new ways to see that we are all connected.
Just like electricity changed the outer world.
Always associated with the heart really do affect the way the heart beats and the quality of the neural signal.
So, you know how sort of people talk about connecting, well, in the industry space or B2B or B2C. I've been talking about H to H, or connecting human to human or heart to heart. And I think that's really where the next phase of our connectivity is, evolving in humanity, for humanity. So it was interesting, when I was very fortunate to have some interaction with Steve Jobs a long time back, and the discussion I had with him about his trip to India, where he and his friend Kotke had traveled to the Himalayas and to kind of almost in search of enlightenment. And in April 1974, when he traveled there, and a great book that he found was Autobiography of a Yogi by Swami Paramahansa Yogananda. And it was really about his great saying, having the courage to follow your heart and intuition, because they really truly know what what will become of you. And I think it's a great book that he in fact read every single year. He had on his iPad, and great inspiration from, I think, learnings that even many people allude to Apple being formed once he got back, and when he joined Atari, and sort of after that came up with conceptualizing Apple. And it's this whole space of, well, technology and spirituality sort of coming together, which has been a part of my own journey for the last decade and a half, where I've been working on many different concepts and ideas, looking at these mood boards from body, mind, and soul, and technology being influenced by nature and many other facets there, and looking at this key trend of balance, and looking at how we've been kind of pretty much out of sync with 24/7 lifestyles that we've been living, and the stress levels being rising with burnouts, depressions, and all that, becoming an increasing concern, even much more than the pandemic itself, as we know. And it's about taking all our senses to the next dimension. So I've been looking at concepts where we look at all 5 of our senses, but how do we uplift them and elevate it to the next level? And one of the concepts that we came up with, in fact, my team and myself in Siemens, this is 15 years ago now, we looked at this space of a concept called Zen, pretty much around music, where we looked at how can it be used as a prime means of relaxation. So imagine you're in the concrete jungle. How can you cocoon yourself and become and be part of this, have the right sort of yin and yang influence, but looking at, haptic ball interface. And we came up with the concept, which was looking like this at that time, and with noise cancellation headphones, and taking you through the right content into a mode called the kind of the Bliss Mode, pretty much. And it was about the core facets of the body, mind, and the soul, looking at the design experience, the user experience, and then the brand experience and product feeling, all integrated to harmonize in that regard. And then this was the concept that I actually worked much further on, and then even presented as my own MTP, or massively transforming purpose, to His Holiness Dalai Lama. And it was about, I'll just read that out, imagining a world where we've created a breakthrough phenomena of a mobile device or an ecosystem or architecture being used to help heal people from their suffering, bring a better work-life balance, help one relax, and humanity rediscover their true essence. So it's something which got quite some eyes, and I think it's where White Mirror has sort of manifested in some form through that. And I very much talk about it in how do we, look at our own within ourselves to find true happiness, because it's difficult to find it anywhere else. And I think, as you've all seen with the COVID, if you can't go outside, it's about going inside. And that's where I think great tools like the Muse and so forth have been a great facet of help. So this whole term of bringing in super longevity, intelligence, and well-being is bringing together this movement of transhumanism, as we call it. And I think that's where we see that whole movement in new skills come about, which are coming about in this space of, moving into the 4th and the 5th industrial revolution, which is under the making. We've seen things evolve, moving up the ladder, like critical thinking, creativity, and so forth. which were not so high up on the list earlier by the World Economic Forum. And something which NeuroSky in fact also got is how do we measure our peak performance, or looking at those, quantifying those 21st century skills like creativity, empathy, engagement, but also look at other states of happiness and so forth, which we can integrate and map, using the brain-computer interface again to, really get a much better understanding on how can we improve them. And I think that's where there's a great book actually by Bruce Nussbaum who talks about, and something which I've then evolved further into from old to new dogmas, it's no longer about user experience, it's about user engagement. It's from a tech-driven to an engagement-driven economy, from consumer to community, needs to wants, empathy to meaning, story to narrative, from just simple brainstorming to connecting the dots. And I think those are key facets of that consciousness that we need to exhibit in a smart city. And as we evolve from the physical, intelligence, emotional, spiritual, and something which is most important now is the adaptability quotient, the AQ, or having that AI capability with relevance for today. And then I think if some of you might have heard of this term called Ikigai, which is really your massively transforming purpose to a regard. It's a great Japanese philosophy of your reason for being, what you love to do, what the world needs, what you get paid for, and what you're good at. When all of that intersect, it's really something which formulates your Ikigai, or your reason for being, in that regard. And what I could recommend is also, very much a couple of great tools there. Or I'm sure you've heard of The Secret, which has been around for a while. It's been a movie and also a documentary and a great book. And a more recent book that a friend of mine wrote that I was fortunate to review was called The Serendipity Mindset. And I think that's where we very much talk about, how do we build that muscle of the law of attraction truly, and intuition and all guiding you. So it's a shift as we move from the old VUCA to the new VUCA, which is vision, understanding, clarity, and agility is what's needed now. So I'm coming towards the end of my presentation now, because I know I've taken a lot of time and been talking quite a bit. The future really needs to be shaped and not predicted, because the world is moving so fast that there are days when a person who says it can't be done is interrupted by a person who's already doing it. A great community for conscious leadership that I was involved with, that was launched at the World Economic Forum this year, is called Wisdom Health. And we talk about regenerative humanity, bringing back ancient wisdom, resilience, and really humane economy and technology-driven elements. I think it's a great learnings on that, and how conscious leadership has evolved to, evolve into that whole facet of a new world order. Because the most exciting breakthroughs of the 21st century will not occur because of technology, but because of an expanding concept of what it means to be human, says John Naisbitt. So I think coming back to the SDGs, that's where we really need to focus. And that's where I'm putting energies with our White Mirror sort of team and work, and how do we map them and how can we influence and really create that right action. And the fourth term that I've been sort of looking at coining is coheartability, which is coherence, adaptability, all coming together with, coming from the heart and the human element of consciousness. So my final couple of slides now on takeaways. So it's about adapting your exponential mindset, bringing collaboration, embracing a level of white mirror type philosophy, having deep curiosity, empathy, and applying Jugaad and frugal thinking. Again, that's a whole massive topic in itself. We could talk about that quite a bit. There's a great book I was showing earlier about Jugaad there, applying simplicity, embracing exponential technologies, deploying rapid experimentation of learning, as I call it, which is learnings from failure, and exploiting experientiation to take storytelling to a new level, incorporating transdisciplinarity, multiple industries, cross-industry, cross disciplines. It's very important that we can actually bring together and be that generalist to quite an extent, but also go deeper into certain topics that we need to. Unlearning, displacing it for more meaningful, building our foresight muscle, and then really taking that journey within of, appropriately applying all those different tools of mindfulness and so forth. And really, at the end, it's all about imagination and applying that, because it's a lot more important than knowledge, as says Albert. Knowledge is limited, imagination encircles the world. And finally, happiness is the new rich, inner peace is the new success, health is the new wealth, kindness is the new cool. And those are some of the mantras, and this was a great circulation that came about on during early part of COVID, which have been spreading. And I'd like to end by quoting the Mahatma, that true collaboration only happens when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. So yeah, I'll just end right here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anuraj. And there have been a few thanks, as a few people have had to move on. It's the way the month is going. People pop in when they can.
Sure.
But there's been a robust chat going on the side. I think some of the local questions, but we will now have the last half hour for those of us who are still able to be here to just raise questions or comments and engage with Anuraj. If you're like me, because I love tech, but I'm also, I think like some people are saying in the chat, not a big tech push person. So one of the things, one thing when you see all of these things are, what does it mean for what you're actually trying to do? So I'm sure a number of you have been provoked, or perhaps you have questions about how this relates at all to the work you do. So I'd just like to open up the space. There's a raise hand feature that Zoom has. Feel free to pop up your hand if you'd like to make a comment, ask a question. I think what is important, and I mentioned to Anuraj that it was likely to come up, is how we in our context connect or struggle to connect. I suppose some of the interesting examples of tech, but also some of the messages that Anuraj is giving us about how he thinks about these things that can be quite difficult to reconcile. I think all of us may have questions in our minds. So let me just open up the space for any hand raising while Anuraj can grab a glass of water. There are, let's just see if there are any that we should start with in the chat while I wait to see if any hands pop up. A number of the comments, I mean, there were some comments about, you know, in a way a concern about the role of governments in all of this. You know, how can governments enable this kind of work? And maybe I can try to reframe that to you perhaps from similar contexts where you've already mentioned being engaged, Anuraj. So for example, you've mentioned doing quite a bit of work in India. Which in some ways perhaps shares some similarities to our kind of contexts here. What in your view has been an enabling or disabling role of governments in enabling the kinds of technologies that you think are more empathetic and are more meaningful for what you'd like to see in your white mirror world?
Sure. So I think just relating to smart cities and so forth and sort of future city developments, India is actually witnessing a massive growth, obviously, as people may know, in terms of its economy, and it has been, well, pre-COVID, and even now it's just slowed down, unfortunately, for a shorter time. But India's got 100 new smart cities coming up just in a matter of next 5 to 7 more years. 36 odd so of them are already almost ready to a certain level. Again, it's really about definition of smart cities as we talk about in there. But we've seen India going through quite some transformation, you know, and there's learnings from you know, experiments that the government has been doing with public-private partnerships, but also then the evolution and really I think the leadership they took to an extent, which has been a great one in e-citizenship sort of capabilities and making that online and digitizing a lot of that, because there was so much paperwork and old school thinking as you can well imagine. And I'm sure Africa and other countries emerging, all the BRICS countries have been going through that same phase of evolution, which the West had been going through early on. And many countries like that still are doing a lot of physical paperwork-based stuff. But I think India leapfrogged in so many revolutions, especially the mobile revolution. So, you know, with landline phones, which were, you know, displaced by mobile so quickly, you know, the growth of mobile has been so phenomenal. And then the low-cost smartphones and that proliferation of entry-level devices, which have been in very affordable and accessible by the layman, and making very simple apps, which have, again, the government has played a key role in, you know, in terms of providing those citizenship services of filling forms, getting your normal rations and you know, having your identity, for example. So I think the UID project in India has been a great example of a great successful, it's been the biggest IT project in the world. So it's called the Unique Identity, and that's where everybody has what is now called the Aadhaar card or a unique number. And so many people were not identified. They didn't have their identification documents, but now they've actually been biometric. Each of the fingerprints have been, we've got a biometric scan of that and the iris scan and so forth. And I think it's the numbers are just phenomenal. It's close to 1 billion people out of the 1.3 odd billion people in India. Almost 1 billion people have already got a UID and a Aadhaar card out there, which is phenomenal. I think you're muted. You're muted, Keshi. Yeah.
Sorry about that. So maybe let's use that one to touch on another thing people were kind of raising in the chat, I guess, is, and it's similar to, the big China, you're talking about the UID now in India. So the trust issue, right? So, and we kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, that on the one hand, one can see the bigger efficiencies that come out of big data used to help with administration and governance. But on the other hand, there's the concern about what that means, yes, for privacy, but also for, the commercialization. I think Anand made a comment that the democratized is a loaded term. Often the cheaper tech is simply commoditized. And so it's not just the idea that this idea that somehow we're all being turned into parts of a big corporate exercise. What are your thoughts on that? And were those issues that came up in India? So with the UID, were there concerns from the citizenry around this sort of identification of people, even though it might assist with delivering services?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's always, both sides of the coin, right? And I think it's about weighing, okay, what is more advantageous and what is bringing more benefit for society. And I think that's where we noticed that, things like what the government has been sort of trying to proliferate through these new e-services and m-services and so forth, is that they obviously, it's privacy to a certain extent does open up the topic. It could very much does open up, but I think it's about bringing better law and order, bringing in better services and more personalization for people. So again, as long as it's done in the right manner and that it's secure. Well, security is, of course, again, encoded, it's cybersecurity is such a big topic there. I won't go there. I'm not an expert at all in any of those spaces, but I think, yeah, it's all about how do you opt in a smart way, create that smart, capable way of having the users being in control of their information, because their own data is the currency, is their own, is something of great value. So it's how much you share. But again, as I said, on one parallel, people share so much on social media so loosely, whereas they're so scared of sharing other valuable things. And that's why we've seen, even in the West, we've seen a very slow pickup of medical records, for example, online medical records. And this whole movement has been going on for so long. I mean, I've still seen hospitals and doctors and everybody still using fax machines from 20, 30 years ago right now for communicating, right? And things like that. But I think it's slowly going away, or rapidly going away now, because we're overcoming those fears now, I think, to an extent. But yeah, it's really something which needs to be a lot more transparent in how your data is being used. And those are the wake ups that we're seeing from companies like the big giants of Googles and Facebooks and so forth of the world are waking up to.
Well, and in a way, that's a point I can see here in the chat. It's a point that Stephanie is just warning about, that if we have to keep mindful about who's actually driving these agendas, and if they are driven by big companies, a lot of the innovations you've shown us, and then I guess maybe it makes sense that the tech that tends to make it to those stages, even if it's startup, would have to be capitalized in some sort of way. And I guess that's why where there's more money, there's more things that make it to the real world. Is that something that needs to shift in your view, or can we still somehow have this kind of conscious tech evolution you're talking about when it's in fact driven by big corporates?
Yeah, but I think that's where the mindset shift I was saying, of the PPP or being like a B Corp, and really thinking planet and purpose and people much before profit. So if every organization has that as the key mantra and the underlying foundation of how they're actually going to serve humanity and bring about that and collaborate and cooperate with the rest of society for the betterment of and uplifting society as a whole. I think big broad terms or vision there, but it can be done. And I think that's where startups are actually are taking great charge, obviously. There are so many, and I think startups are, in general, or in many cases, the B Corp driven ones, social, entrepreneurship sort of movement is enabling that to a very much higher extent. So that's what we need to bring about in the corporate world and the enterprise and the space where they just so been driven by boardrooms and profits and all, and that wake up's been happening fairly quickly now, I would say. They've all been doing great things with charity and other social causes on the side, but it has to be mainstream. It has to be just part of the whole underlying ethos of the organization.
Yeah, no, I think I appreciate that point, and I guess with the startup ecosystems, why that's important as well is, we talk about democratizing of the tech, but of course democratizing of the innovation space itself, being more inclusive and allowing more to happen. So Brian agrees with you on the privacy point. I think he's saying that privacy is something people already give up so much that it needs to be leveraged so that voices can be heard. So I think Brian's agreeing with you. Rian asks a question here. He says, what would you consider to be the infrastructural building blocks or catalysts towards stimulating the development of smart communities or smart cities and associated technologies in a country like South Africa, especially with our sort of big rural areas? So what would be the infrastructural building blocks or catalysts to stimulate relevant innovation for us?
Right. Again, I would draw that parallel or that learnings from like what's been in India's done with e-governance and m-governance and those sort of apps, citizenship apps and so forth, citizen apps rather, which I think have been a great framework to connect all those dots, of people applying for licenses, for filling their forms. And that's where I think the rural parts of the market in India earlier were very disconnected. And I think you can see a similar thing, that disconnect between urban and rural, people who really have that digital divide to quite an extent. How do we bridge that, and how do we bridge that socio-economic divide to the next level on that regard? And it's all interlinked, I would say. So it's about bringing and mass education of and the simplicity of proliferating these simple to use apps, which everybody in every low-cost smartphone can also deploy, and people can use at different levels of literacy even. So how do you make that mainstream, and how do you reach out to those people and handhold them at many cases? Because there are, even in the Western market, we have elderly people who haven't used computers, and they need, we've had mobile phones, and I've been involved very much in designing phones from so many different angles for elderly people, for aged care, and looking at phones with big buttons, phones with bigger screens, and the UI, the whole customization. And I think similarly, we need to be able to be very inclusive for people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And that's where we need to make it so universal. And the government is certainly, I think, playing a very key role in that. And I think this is where we've seen, I've been involved with a lot of disability tech, with accelerators like Remarkable and others, where we talk about inclusivity. And I mean, we're talking about 1 in 10 people on this planet are disabled, if in some regard or the other. Even mental disability is huge. So it's how do you make something more accessible is the key there, I think.
Great, thank you. Katerina, your hand is up, your screen is on, welcome. Just unmute.
Yeah, it'd be good to see some people, if anybody can. Yeah, hello, Katrina. And Katrina's done some great work. She's actually written a white mirror, next version of the article with smart cities. In fact, I just sent that to you, Geshi, earlier. So she's the one, and part of Wisdom Health community. And we've been, great that she's proliferating some amazing ideas there.
Thank you very much
Hello,
for
Katrina.
the opportunity to enter in the conversation. And I really love the talk, Anuraj, because you really made this overview of the vast technologies, and these technologies are no anymore in the lab. They are already on the market. They are available. They are cheap. And I think we are in times that we need public space for public debates about moral values and responsibility on a personal level, in a sense that education to the young generation that will use these technologies and that are living already in the West, I suppose it's quite nowadays equally around the world, the young generation, children up to 10, 15 are totally immersed in the virtual world. And we as parents, we are not educating because we are totally don't understand the virtual world already. And there is a huge responsibility and a huge threat over moral, how you are living and using, and what is the values. We speak about inclusiveness and no anti-racism, no discrimination, and this is for our generation. The generation of my kids, they are totally inclusive. They're speaking with square heads and ugly faces as avatars. They really cannot understand the fighting between gender, between races and other countries. They are totally connected. I mean, they cannot feel the space, for example, or the time. And I believe we need as adults to have more conversation with the young generations that are living in these virtual spaces and get more knowledge from them and more user experience exactly how they perceive the world, what is real for them. Because I believe for this generation, there is a huge, there is no frontier between physical and virtual world. For them, the screen is another door, and their experience are totally realistic. So when we see all these devices about our body, I always think about how lazy we can become if we are not educating in responsibility. If we just use these devices and we think that we are meditating, how connected we can be in our bodies because we trust the device to measure us. I think we need to have these discussions to be really wake up, because technology is so easy to use that we really can become lazy. And then we can be really become manipulated by policies, by corporate interests. If we don't have these discussions, it's not about, to me, it's not about black, negative, and positive. It's about the balance between two, to understand in a bigger picture the ecosystem, the relationships, and see how some negative points of the technology can be positive points to me to motivate me to train more, to go to deeper understanding of the technology, how it's doing, not just to trust it, use it, and become lazy. To me, my hope for the future is that this easiness of the technology make us more curious to go deeper and to challenge our limits as a people, as a persons, to be really aware where the reality is real and where is come fantasies. I mean, in the past, there was this Dao word, I am the butterfly that is dreaming a human, or I am a human that is dreaming to be a butterfly. And today, to me, this become a reality, because with the virtual reality glasses, you can become a butterfly. So how much we can distinguish and how much we need to redefine what we call the reality. And I believe for the audience, it will be very interesting to see your points over this need for responsibility, for conversation between us, and really take all the points around the technologies.
No, I totally agree with you. And in fact, my own journey, I think we get carried away so quickly with technology. And you're right, with the youngsters and the young people are, for them, the digital, revolution is a given, and social media is just their foundation, they've grown up with. But I think it's a real wake up that is happening. And I think that's what things like the social dilemma, which is waking us all up to a level and saying, we need to take our digital detoxes. And it's something which I realized in my own career. I was so engrossed with designing mobile phones, using them, applying, and as you saw with many examples I've been giving, but at the same time, my awakening was about how do I flip that? It's not about turning off my phone. It's about flipping it into what I call the bliss mode and enabling that reduced screen time to a level where I'm immersing, and it's helping me to go back into myself for mindfulness. And that's where these tools, some of the sensors and the tools that come in to help quantify and then to help me become better in that mindfulness exercise, for example. And I think, it's really about what we're seeing is technology is also causing more inequalities in that level, and I think we're seeing, it's unfortunate that if people who get carried away are so dwelled into it that it's become an addiction, much more than that. And we need to help people wake up to that new and take the right detoxes at the right time to find that balance. You're right. It's not about a black or white. And that's why white mirror is not about saying you flip into a totally positive manner. It's about finding the balance and equilibrium of every level of your balance of life in general. Yeah.
I really appreciate that you're raising that, and Katrina made this point, because I do think that, well, as the mother of teenagers, I have a very real concern about them. But in a way, it mirrors, I suppose, how all of us see these things. That and we're in a context that's a deeply unequal country, and where development issues are real. And sometimes, I'm sure for many people, perhaps even people on this call, it gets a little bit irritating when people want to talk about technology, when people are still struggling with food and sanitation. I think a few people have made these points on there. And so you feel like you almost have to either be a person who's into tech or a person who's against tech because you're doing serious things, so it becomes this kind of really strange thing. And I often find myself, even within myself perhaps, wondering, how does one maintain that balance? Because I think also sticking our heads into a hole about technology that actually is happening around us is also probably not the solution. Believing tech is only good is not particularly helpful, and I think you're both saying as much. Believing it's all terrible is also not really great. So I guess that question of how we sustain that consciousness and how institutions are also encouraged to play a role in that, I think becomes quite tricky. And I'm sure it's tricky for organizations to figure out as well, for governments and for that. You either have to be, in South Africa, there's been a very big drive around the fourth industrial revolution. And I think people are a little bit, sick of it sometimes, hearing about, how technology is changing everything when people are still struggling with very basic things. And so I don't know if you feel, from an institutional perspective, since a few people raised this in the chat, what is it the government needs to do, or what is it that whoever needs to do? Are there any examples, any positive examples perhaps you see about, I know you've mentioned in terms of leadership, so the leadership itself being perhaps visionary, but do you see other examples of how we can be encouraged to find and sustain this kind of a balance as societies, perhaps through institutions, or does it all come from the individual?
Sure, maybe I'll just touch on one point earlier, which is, I think rightly, we have to talk the right language, the same language rather, like for teenagers, right? And you've got 3 teenagers there. And, we have to talk their language, and we have to use technology in the right level to get to communicate with them. And I think that's where we've seen great tools. Obviously, teenagers have been screenagers. So we have to use some sort of a screen. And then I think I'll maybe invite even Brian to make some comments, because my colleague there, he's been part of our White Mirror team, and he's done an amazing amount of work there. He's based in Oakland, up in San Francisco. And, he built this Unity Sanctuary, which is a great spiritual upliftment journey in virtual reality. Again, through technology, he's proliferated in Burning Man and created such an uplifting experience, which is able to, and I think that's where I was talking about this Bliss Mode and being able to use the right means of technology to take people through a journey and bring them out in a very positive manner, and really use that in a very harmonious sort of means. So I think that's one great example. Maybe Brian might want to say some more comments. I know I can see great comments he's been making already in chat. But,
yes, he's informed us, and I don't know if he's willing to chat now. He just informed us that he's being very careful about a sleeping wife, and so he was worried about waking her up.
Hey everybody, it's Brian. Can you hear me?
Oh, there's Brian. He's willing to speak.
Sorry, I just wanted to say hi, everyone. I'm trying to be quiet. I'm a New Yorker, so my voice is like vibrates the apartment. So she's sleeping, but thank you for your beautiful introduction, Anuraj. I'm almost humbled by what you said, very much so. And actually, you have the rainbow behind your head now. Thank you.
So that's the white mirror, white rainbow mirror, as we talk about it now.
But one of the reasons, the driving forces for the Unity Sanctuary is, the design is kind of inspired by, aesthetic and design from different culture and religion, to sort of, when people walk into the space, they feel maybe more open to the connection because maybe they recognize something they've learned through their own culture or religion or something from someone else they know, and modalities of sound and light healing that would happen in this space would be from other cultures and religions, and sort of bringing together unity, which is why I call it Unity Sanctuary. And actually the altars will be having their design in different cultures and religion. And I feel like, it's important to include everyone to show that we're all the same. And the technology is a very big part of it. It's easier sometimes to see the power behind you. Like for instance, if you take EEG and create a connection between something that's very large and, like a lighting sequence in a big sculpture, and, a child can see how powerful they really are, how powerful, they are, the connection is coming from them. And using sort of technology, wrapped around, artistic wrapped around technology to sort of help people digest more a complicated scientific understanding to show, it's not hard. These things are not hard. Everyone has a voice, everyone has feelings and emotion. And us here in this room, we understand maybe a little more of how to use technology to leverage that. So, the only reason I mentioned government is because government funds to the military so much innovation, through big business. And, I'd like to see more of that sort of, spread out amongst what we have for the general public, like release more information, help us more. That's really more of what I'm thinking. And I also mentioned something in the chat called Earthship. I don't know enough about it to explain it in better detail, but Earthship is a really interesting program that teaches people how to build their own sustainable house in a sustainable community. It's an education program that teaches people how to create their life and where they live and energy. Wonderful. And it's something maybe, and if anyone wants, I've put the link in here, I'll put it again. Here we go. I put it again in case it's got lost in the chat. Earthshift Global, if anyone wants to look into that. A friend of mine introduced it to me. And it's just such a beautiful concept, create this beautiful house you live in that's completely sustainable, solar powered, using energy in really beautiful ways, and teaching you how to do it. Thank you. Thank you for letting me speak. I think that's all I can say right now.
Thank you, Brian. That's
Thanks,
really
Brian.
wonderful. Yeah, I think we need to protect our wonderful planet with the precious, gift we have of nature and the Gaia philosophy, as I was mentioning earlier. And I think that's where the smart city consciousness has to be driven, with harmonizing all these entities and say, okay, how are we living amongst billions of other organisms who've been in this ecosystem for so long, much longer than us itself, and been in such a equilibrium state. So yeah.
And I think that's a great note to end on, just as we come in here. And thanks as well, Brian, for the resources in the chat, because I suspect that part of the fear about technology, or even the exaggerated hope in it sometimes, must come from some kind of disempowered feeling people have about it, right? So these messages that talk about, so consciousness is not just about being a conscious user of something that's happening to you, but being a conscious actor. I think, being able to ask those questions, being able to think about what are our values, increasing our curiosity, like Katrina was saying, deciding why and what you're using something for, like Brian is suggesting to us. And I think these are really important messages, Anuraj, that you leave us with. We're getting up close to time, so I can see people are beginning to head off to other things. It's late afternoon here in South Africa, so it's probably, we don't have much traffic anymore since COVID, but I suspect everybody has their afternoon routines anyway. But I just really like to thank all of you who are still here, and Anuraj for taking the time. I know it's the middle of the night, as we can see in your background. In the middle of somewhere.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, and so yes, we really appreciate your being up this late. I think you probably provoked a number of us. And like I said, in our context, I think many of us struggle to make sense of what all of this means in our contexts. But I think we do have, and I see Patrick's just posted a comment here about tech that can be more empowering, that can make us more independent, self-reliant, and sovereign, you know, as opposed to what many of us fear, which is this other side of tech, the idea that it's about us being surveilled or controlled by big bad something else. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to ask those of us who are still here, if you're willing to turn on your cameras for a brief moment. My friend Melissa here, who's our tech host, is wanting to take a picture of all of you. She can take a picture of your names as well, but for those who are willing to turn on their camera for a moment, there we see Brian. Please do that so that we can see you all and we can see each other and who's out there for a brief moment. Hi, Patrick, good to see you. Rian, Nati, Kumo. Look at all these beautiful faces. Mabato, good to see you. So just turn on your cameras if you can. As we're doing that, the next sessions we've got in the series, the next one's going to be on imagination, and that, for those of you who are familiar with theory U or also causal layered analysis, this idea that we get into a stage where we can think about changing the metaphor or the myth, the image we have of the future, and what's the role of representation in that. So we'll have an urban designer, architect doing, sharing some of his experimenting and thinking in that space. Some of you might, like speculative architecture and some of the work people have done for many years in this kind of work. But quite exciting that. The next one will be really much more about people, about participation, and what does it mean to talk about these things in a much more communal, inclusive way, especially in unequal contexts like ours. And then only in the last session do we get to talking about what we always talk about, which is what should somebody somewhere do about it. And hopefully by the time we get to that, it might be, following this sequence of conversations, a different quality of conversation than what we're all sick of. So let's see whether we succeed in the course of the month to evolving into a different conversation. So I'm gonna take this picture quickly, or if somebody hasn't already taken it, so say cheese. And that didn't happen. Let's try that again. Okay, we've got it now. Gotcha. And I'd just like to say thank you to you all. So go well. We'll see you next week. There are more events on the website. Check it out. There's like 80 events happening all month. It'll be great to see more of you. Anuraj, have a good night. And yeah, let's hope we're all more conscious as we get on with things. Hi, Stephanie. Bye, everyone. Go well.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Hey, CC, it's Brian. Can you hear me still?
Yes, can hear you.
What is that conversation, the lecture you were talking about, the one on the imagination, the architectural design? What
okay, so that's next Tuesday, same time.
Beautiful. I am definitely going to be in that one. It sounds amazing. Thank you.
I hope it will be.